So the next thing I want to do is to actually run a Selenium bot to get all the air grid data. So just to kind of give you a bit of background on this, how we are going to do this. If I go back onto my location, so whenever I open air grid, the idea is to actually bot to come in, open this location, go into renewable energy and go into system and renewable data, and basically go into these files, and I'm just going to pass the name of these files. So if I go back and say something like inspect, so like what exactly is in the background, what's the name of these files. So as you can see, the target is equal to underscore self, and then this is link, which again I can pass on this name to actually open this link here, which will actually download this Excel file. Okay, so let's start building that. So I'm going to go back to my Spider IDE. So first thing I'm actually going to do is bring out all the dependencies that I need for this. So first of all, we are going to write down all the dependencies we are going to use it. So in this case, first of all, we're going to do something like import warning module. Don't really want to see any warnings. And within that, we are going to do something like w dot So let's start including dependencies for Selenium as well. So from Selenium, we're going to import our WebDriver. Usually whenever you're working with Selenium, I do find that the Chrome driver is usually a big problem to actually get it to work. So I definitely recommend you to kind of like download another package, which is WebDriver Manager, which again, once you have downloaded the manager, it actually makes sure what version we need to actually use the Chrome driver, and it does it all automatically for you, so you don't really have to worry about what type of version you have to download. So what I'm actually going to do is, once I have the WebDriver, I'm actually going to also get my WebDriver Manager. WebDriver underscore manager dot Chrome, and I'm actually going to import, which is Chrome driver manager. Okay, so once I've got this, so I'm actually going to use a sleep module as well, because I know I will be doing the sleep for a couple of times just to make sure we're doing it right. Because again, sometimes when you're opening the site, you need to kind of like give it a bit of a time to kind of refresh the page, or if you're clicking some button, we need to give it a time to download the files. So for all that, we will be using sleep modules. I'm actually going to say from time, I'm going to import the module which is sleep. Okay, so once we have all these dependencies, I think that should be okay for now. So the next thing I'm actually going to do is just to make sure I have called all of the things correctly, and I'm actually going to run these first. Okay, so that's actually warnings, not warning, and I'm actually going to just make sure I run that module again. Okay, so that should be okay. Okay, so the next thing what I'm actually going to do is create another function for that. So def, and we can actually just call it something like get system demand data maybe. Yeah, that should be okay. Self. And then I'm actually going to start initializing my driver, which is driver is equal to WebDriver.Chrome. I'm going to call the Chrome function, and within that I'm actually going to pass on my Chrome driver and manager. And I'm going to call that function .install. Just make sure it installs all the recommended files that it needs for that driver version, which will be able to run those files then. So once I do that, I'm actually going to do something like driver.set. I'm actually going to set the size of the window as well. So size, which could be maybe something like 1120 by, we can maybe set it by 1000. Okay, so that should do. So what we're going to do next is, while we are actually creating this, I'm actually going to start running this function as we go, because I just want to make sure I'm not making any mistakes. So what I'm actually going to do next is, first of all, I do need to pass on a link as well. What I'm actually going to define within my links, I'm going to copy the link that I need. So if I get the link for this site, which is going to be self.link is equal to, so just for the moment, I'm actually going to run this because I'm not running it as a function. I'm actually going to just run it separately anyway. And if I go back to my variable export, if I go back to my variables, I can actually see the link is created now. Go back on the bottom. First of all, let's open the driver. So just to make sure we haven't made any mistake. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and run the module. It does look like that I haven't ran the module yet because we got the warning module error before. So once I do that, I can see that modules are now loaded. Once I do that, I can go back and try and run this line, which is webdriver.chrome, Chrome driver manager. And as you can see, that runs correctly. So once it runs, it actually opens this window. I do want to resize this window as well. So hence why I have this command here. So once I run this, oops, there should have been a no gap in this. So it basically resizes my window into a small window so we can actually see what we're doing here now. So the next, what I'm actually going to do within that is I'm actually going to open my link. So I'm actually going to say something like driver.get, pass on the link variable that I've just created. Usually in my module, I would have rather said self.link, but we're just running it manually on one by one. So just want to make sure it's just a link. Click on this. That should actually, if I open it back, that should open my link, which is good. So once I actually open it, what happens is, as you can see, I do have to accept all these cookies. Usually if I have done that one time, it actually saves within my browser, but because this is opening on a scratch, you do have to, as in that user, you do have to accept all of this to move on to the site itself. So let's first click on this button to make sure that goes away. So what we're going to do, how we're going to do that is we are going to pass on something like, we're going to find that element and we are going to click on that element. Now to just make this more faster, I've already got my commands for pressing the buttons, stuff like that. So I'm just going to pass those and copy paste them from here. So once I get my first one, which is find element, and click on accept all button. But I'm still going to break it down for you just to kind of like have a bit of understanding on that, why I'm doing this. So first of all, what I'm actually going to do is once it's opening the site, I'll give it a bit of time to load. So I'm actually going to say sleep, run the sleep module and just say sleep for 4 seconds. Just make sure that the site is loaded properly and there's no errors. Then I'm actually going to, before clicking the button, I'm actually going to try to click that button. So driver dot find underscore element by underscore x path. Okay, so that should do. Then once I do that, I'm actually going to pass, actually I can pass the link. So just this one here. So what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to find that button which contains a text. I'm calling the text function, which is again looking for a button which holds a text called accept all, which is the actual button. So if I go back on this and click on inspect, I can see that it holds the text which is accept all. Go back and click on this. Okay, so as you can see, this is a button which holds the text which is accept all. So I'm going to find this text and click on it. So to click on it, I also have to press the button click. So how you do that is to do that click call of the function. Okay, so once I run this, that should be able to then click on the specific file. So once I do that, so what I want to do if that click doesn't happen, I also want to pass on that. So I'm actually going to say something like accept. If you're not able to do it, maybe do a sleep again for, say for example, 2 seconds. Then I want you to print the error, which is something like, maybe I can call something like connection failed. Okay, so that will give me an error, which is connection failed. So once I do that, now that should run okay. If I go back here, and as you can see, I've already clicked on that button, which means the accept all is now gone. So I am actually on the site and I've accepted all the cookies, so I can actually download the data now. Next thing what we want to do is we want to actually click on this link. Once I click on this link, I can actually see I can pass the values for this link to open this link after that link. Just make sure that we have opened this area where we want to extract information from. To be honest, actually, I'll go into the renewable energy just to make sure we are on the exact path of the link, and which is more under renewals. Once I click on that, that's where I want to kind of like migrate my page to. So I'm actually going to take this link and copy that. And what I'm actually going to do is, just to make sure we are running it through the code, I'm actually going to go back to my home screen and let's start creating that. So after this click, I'm actually going to click onto the next option, which to be honest, we won't really click it. We will actually do a get to that path. So we can say something like driver.get, and I'm actually going to pass on that link that I just copied here, which is the actual link which we just looked at, which is how the grid works and renewals. So this is when it will click on that specific link. Once we go onto that link, just to kind of like go back before we just run this part, I'm actually going to go back into renewable energy. What I want my Selenium bot to do is to click on this arrow sign. So I'm actually going to just look at what is that exactly. So if I look at that, inspect. So this is an actually, so like a button that we want to press, which is a row list button. And we want to press the button which is called System and Renewable Data. So we are going to press this button, which will open all these files. And then if I look at the location for this is my actual path. And this is again a file path, which I can actually pass it on as a link and open that link by passing on this 2020 \21. So let's start doing this work. So first of all, we want to do is we're going to click on that button to open up. So I'm actually going to say something like driver dot find underscore element, which will be my X path. So I'm actually going to just make sure I have this path here, which is the actual location of the button. I'm just going to copy that. And I'm actually going to come here and paste this. So this is the location of that anchor link, which contains the text, which is called System and Renewable Data, which will actually open that extended window. Once it opens that, what I actually want to obviously want to click it so it will open it. So for that, I'm actually going to just pass this function click. So once it opens this, the next thing I want to do is kind of like scroll down as well. I'm actually going to do that first, scroll. So driver.execute. And that will be underscore script. I'm actually going to pass my so like JavaScript functions, which will actually scroll down the window. So just to make sure we are calling it right. Yeah. So that will just basically scroll down the window. Once it scrolls down the body part of the window, and then what I want to do is I want to actually run a for loop. And why am I running a for loop is to just make sure, because we have different file names. So I want to basically open all of these files and download them into the download folder. So just to make sure, obviously you have to create some sort of list first to make sure we are calling all of the files. So I'm actually going to call my list up on top. If I go back here and I can just say something like self.files that I want to open, which is the names of the files which are there in the location, which I'm actually going to just, I have it copy pasted here, which I will pass it on as a list. So as you can see, I'm passing on a variable, which is again my list variable, and I have file names 2020, 21, 2018, 19. So all these file names I want to download automatically. Same way if in future there's a new file, I can just basically add on that list in my script, and I can add on that within this list, and it will automatically download that file for me. So if I go back down, so what I want to basically do now is create a for loop to kind of like start reading those. So just to do that, what I'm actually going to do in here is for I in self dot files. Now just to make sure, maybe we'll take off the self for the moment, because I do want to run it manually for the second. So what I'm actually going to do is, actually I haven't created that file yet. So first of all, I'm actually going to create it first. Okay, so we have a list variable now, and then I'm going to go back down. So for in files, so the first thing we are going to do within that is, once we have done all that, I'm just going to make sure I'm keeping good bit of time between that, just to make sure the operations are not, if for some reason operations are taking time, so we're doing exact sleeping in the middle, so just make sure there's no errors. So we're going to do sleep for 7 seconds. Once we do that, what I'm actually going to do next is I'm actually going to create a path automatically for this. So for this, I'm actually going to create 3 variables. which is in a string format. And I'm actually going to copy my paths just to make sure I'm doing it right. So I'm creating this link automatically for this within the for loop. And the string 2 will be the actual element from the loop itself, which will be string I, because that's the actual element from the list. Then the string 3 will be the last bit of the code, which is the last bit of the link, just to make sure that we are building that link first to actually call it. So string this. So once we have done that, and what I can then do simply is just concatenate them all together within one string. So I can just call it as string path, and within that I can do something like is equal to, and I can basically just sum them. Perfect. So we have our path here, which is again combination of these three. Just make sure that we are doing it right. What I'm actually going to do is run this. Okay, so the reason for the sleep is as well because we want to just make sure when we are running the element within the loop, we are giving it proper sleep time in the middle. So it gives it time to download one file, sleep for 7 seconds, download second file. So as you can see, once it finishes, it creates, like, the last string path is for 2014 and 2015, which is good. It looks perfect, and we can actually call this link the exact same way we called before, which is containing the text exactly the way it is. So for this, I'm actually going to call that function again, say something like driver, that will be dot find element, find underscore element underscore XPath. And to find the XPath, we are going to pass on is the path we created, string underscore path variable. Then I'm actually going to click on that. Okay, so as you can see, what we have done here so far is we have created our path, and this is a for loop, so the path will be created 4 times because there's 4 files in my list. And within that, we will be clicking the file, which will download the file, and it will give it sort of like 7-second break in the middle as well. Just to make sure that whole thing runs all together, what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to close my function now here and reopen it again, just to make sure that we can see everything working from end to end. So once I do that, I'm actually going to select it all and run it. So we're just going to wait and see how it looks like. So as you can see, it's turning on my Chrome driver on the back end. Once it opens, it changes the size of the window, clicks on the accept all. Once it clicks on the accept all, and then it goes into the location we want. It does seem that there has been an error which says connection failed. Something went wrong, so I'm just going to cross-check that. Okay, so it does seem like there's something has been failed, and I think I do know the error, which is around find element. I didn't make a mistake here, so as you can see, find element, it should have been find element by path. So I just made a mistake of a typo here again, so I'm actually going to just make sure that's one of the reasons why it failed, because it wasn't able to open this location. Thinking I haven't really gave the by here as well, which is why this is happening. I should have checked it before, but that's where you kind of like do the debugging on your code, to be honest. And once I do that, let's look at it again. It should work now. There should not be any errors now. So hopefully it goes through as it should be. So I should click on the button, which is accept all, which is next. It should go into the location, scroll down, which it did, and it should download the files, which is again by path. So as you can see, that's good. It's downloading the files, so it has downloaded the 2020 and 2021, and it should give a break between that, and it should download all the 4 files exactly the way it is doing right now. So that it looks promising. That means we can easily find these different file paths, and we can give it the access like this, and it should download all of our 4 files. So once this is done, we can exactly see that all the 4 files are now there in our downloads folder. Just to make sure, we'll actually go to our downloads folder. Perfect. So the files are there, which is perfect, which is for these files. The next thing I want to do is I want to actually have its own folder as well. So I'm actually going to go back into my data. Let's create a folder here, which will be so like AirGrid data. So I want my files to automatically come from download folder within the same function, bring the files from download folder as well into this AirGrid folder, so we have all the data in one directory. So let's start kind of like doing that. So this is our location for the source. So first of all, what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to pass the absolute path for this folder. Just going to copy my path. Let's go back into our script, and I'm actually going to say something like self dot air grid folder, which is then equal to the actual absolute path of the location. We are actually just going to define this as well. Once we go back down, once our function has ran, now as you can see, I do see these two errors. That's only because I'm basically using a variable which is actually within a different function, so I just need to say self dot, and that error should go away. But before that, what I'm actually going to start doing is bringing the information from my downloads folder, which is the exact name of the files. I'm actually going to bring that into this location. So let's start doing that. First of all, we're just going to make sure, if it takes time, we actually give it a proper sleep in the middle. Sleep for 6 seconds. Then we are going to give it a download path, which is the empty string. Then I'm actually going to do something like, I'm actually going to do for loop and find the files which is within the extension and load them. Now, if I go back and just see one file for 1 second, just make sure if I want to do any sort of really minor editing before it comes to the location. So if I open the file in my Excel, okay, so as you can see, it has some different values on the right hand side of the table, which is these values. And it does has quarter hourly data. Now again, this is a different level of the data. It's on 15 minutes, and my weather data is on a 1 hour basis. So I do need to do a lot of work on and I'm actually working on the cleaning of these files. But at the moment, if I just take the files from this point, I should be okay if I'm not taking these data within my files, because that's not really useful for me. Okay, so I'm actually just going to bring the files from this to this, which is my A2K variables. Yep, that's okay. All right, so let's start bringing them up in this location. So first of all, I'm actually doing the for loop. So for file name in os.list directory function, that's perfect. And then I'm actually going to say self dot, I do need to pass on my actual file name here. So before I'm actually mentioning it here, where is my downloads folder path? So which should be equal to, I'm actually going to say self.downloads folder path. I'm actually going to copy my path for downloads folder first. So just want to give the absolute path where the files needs to be picked up from. Perfect. So that's the exact location I want my files to be picked up from. Let's go back down, and in this case, I'm actually going to mention this downloads folder. So once it takes these files, so what I want to do next is check if the extension, again, we want to check if the extensions are CSV or Excel files. We only pick those files. So in this case, we are going to say something exact same that we did before, which is if any ext, which is extension in file name. So I'm just going to quickly type this function up. So as you can see now is like we have done all our functions, and so I'm just going to break it down quickly for you. So first of all, I've entered the same list directory, downloads folder, looked at any extension which is equal to the Excel or CSV file, read that in, print that file name, take that file name, then basically what I'm doing is getting the download path, which is again path.join with the download folder and the actual file name. Then what I want to do is I want to read that Excel file, and I also want to read it only the columns, which is from A to K, because I don't want the extra columns that we discussed in this slide, which is the actual writings about the file. So we don't really need that. So I'm actually going to just read it from A to K columns. Next, what I want to do is I want to get the upload path, which is I'm just replacing the path from Excel to CSV file because I want to save these files as the CSV files. Then finally, I'm saving the file into the air grid folder, which is the path that I've decided up here, which is the absolute path of the error grid data folder. Once I do that, I'm actually uploading the file with the index false. And I've also included the call of this function on here. So when I'm actually going to run this call, it should update all the data with using this system demand data, which is a Selenium bot that goes up and downloads files. And it should also run all these 29 files again to make the call to the API and download the files. So let's just run this before we move ahead with the next function. You're going to go on the bottom of the code again, just to make sure. Yep, so it should be opening my Chrome driver now, which is again opening here. Okay, so let's wait and see once. Okay, so it's getting all these 4 files which we want for our data frame to be created on that. And once these 4 files are downloaded, I'm actually going to go back to my code so you can actually see while these files are actually moving from the downloads path to the other folder. Okay, so while this is doing it, so that should be, click on the last file, perfect. Let's go back to the code. So it should now start moving these files. And what I'm actually going to do is, there are my 4 files from the downloads folder. I'm actually going to go back to my error grid folder. So you can see it is already moving the files into this location. Okay, so we have our first file. I think that the one which is there already from 2016, 2017 one, which is again from the previous run. So as you can see, it should bring all these 4 files one by one, and they should have some seconds sleep in the middle. So it's taking time to kind of bring them one by one. So once we have all these 4 files added, now what it should do is it should go back to my other code and start loading these files. So yeah, as you can see, the Chrome driver is now closed in the background, and it is loading those 29 files. So as you can see within this script, what we have done so far is, so we have 3 functions running on the background for the API, 1 function for the Selenium, which is again downloading all the demand data and also downloading all the future weather data. And the next what we are going to look at is how to build the historical weather data and get that into its own folder, which is Material folder. And once we have all these together, again, I'm also thinking of from a future perspective, and I'm actually automating the whole project, how I'm actually going to use all this. And basically, I don't really want to rework again when I'm actually doing the automation. I'm already thinking about that. I'm actually building the whole package in a way that I can actually just run this and automate my task. So next one, what I'm going to do is get the historical data. Third way, we are going to use through request module, where we'll actually pass on all the links where the data is, and basically use those links to download the files and move it from one location to the other location.